Hi, LinkedIn superstars. Welcome to Get Hired Live. I'm your host, Andrew Seaman, LinkedIn's senior news editor for job searches and careers. As always, I want to welcome you and also ask you to introduce yourselves in the comments. I already see so many people doing that already. We have Dolores from Texas, Jamie from Tennessee, Amy from New Orleans, one of my favorite cities, Kristen from France, bonjour, Maureen from California, Paul from New Mexico, Kevin from Canada, Nora from Chicago, Terry from Arkansas, Laura from Indiana, and Helena from Portugal. So keep introducing yourselves in the comments, but more than your name and where you're from, also tell us a little bit about your careers and your job search. Maybe you're looking for work. Maybe you're looking to move into a new field. Maybe you're looking to maybe just level up in the job that you have. Tell us a little bit about the journey that you're on, and we might be talking a little bit about that later on. Because we have a great guest today who's super informative when it comes to navigating job searches and careers. And in fact, I want to bring him onto the screen right now. Jerry Lee. Welcome, Jerry. He is the COO and co-founder of Juans. So how are you doing?
Andrew, first, thank you so much for having me, and everybody in the chat, thank you so much for tuning in. I am doing fantastic, and I'm so excited to talk to you about the job search.
Of course, yeah. And you're coming to us from bright and early from sunny Los Angeles. I assume it's sunny there. It's usually a good bet. So why don't we start off by you telling us a little bit about yourself, because you have a really interesting background.
Sure. Yes. So, a little bit about my background, everybody. So, I am proudly from a first generation low income background. If that resonates with you, type me in the chat. I want to be able to see the representation here. And I have a huge passion for helping every single one of you. And so, coming from that background, I got into college not knowing a single thing about recruiting. I didn't know what a resume was, networking, interviewing, none of that. My roommate actually had to show me how to tie a tie, funny enough. And so, but the community I was in part of really fostered me to be really career first, helped me understand what a good resume looks like, and allowed me to be the first intern at Google for my alma mater. Shortly after I graduated, I joined Google as an analyst. 8 months later, I was promoted to being a strategist. 6 months after that, strategy and operations manager. And a year after that, I was in my last role as a senior strategy and operations manager before I left to join a tech company called Lucid to lead their product strategy team. And after that, I am now the co-founder and COO of Wansulting. If you have heard of Wansulting, type hashtag Wansulting in the chat. I want to see it. I want to see how many of you that we've touched or maybe have even influenced. And that's been my career journey so far.
Yeah, and obviously you're well known on social media. I think we just talked about how you have quite a number of TikTok followers on the TikTok machine, and obviously you're popular on LinkedIn. And we're going to be flashing your profile URL at the bottom of the screen so people can check it out if they haven't followed you already. And one of the things that we talked about a little bit earlier is that people, they're still trying to find work, even though people hear about a good labor market. There's still a lot of people who they can't find work, and then some people who they hear that news and they want to look for new jobs, and probably some of them are in the comments now, and I want to say hi to a few of them. Erica from South Carolina, Donald from Georgia, Jeanette from Indiana, Sergio from New Jersey, across the river from me, Michelle all the way from Hawaii, so welcome. We have
Wow.
Rob from Utah, Kieran from India, Michaela from Maryland, Jordan from Texas, Greg from Massachusetts, Anya from New York City, where I'm coming from, Michelle from Chicago, and Haley from Los Angeles, so she's in your backyard, Jerry. But you talked a little bit to me about how people can find jobs without actually applying. And some people, they may think that's, that sounds really strange, but what do you mean by that? So how do you, how would people even go about starting that, or making that a goal for themselves?
Andrew, great question. The first question I have for the audience here is, who has heard of the ATS? Type me in the chat. Because chances are, if you've heard of the ATS, then you've heard of this auto rejection machine that as soon as you throw in your application will get thrown out and you're never going to see the light of day, right? Most companies, almost 95% of the recruiters that we've interviewed, actually say that ATS is really a way for them to get organized. isn't for them to automatically reject candidates. None of that. Really is for them to classify their candidates, and there really is no auto rejection system in the system. But that being said, if that's the case, then your resume is going to be one little piece of paper on a stack of 200, 300 other applicants. So the question then begs, well, what can you do beyond the application system? And us at Consulting, we've really thought about this in a 4-tier process, what we call the 4 tiers of applying to a job. Now, and it goes from most effective, which is tier 1, and least effective, which is tier 4. The way that we think about this is, let's start from tier 4, the least effective, applying online. Applying online simply means that you click the apply button, you have anywhere from about a 2 or 5% chance of getting an interview, even less if you come from a non-traditional background. Then a step higher is what we call employee referral. That's where if I was still at Google and I said, hey, listen, Art or Aza from the audience, I want to put you into the Google referral system. What that does is it basically guarantees a recruiter will look at your resume, no more nor less. So then brings up the question, well, what are the other ways of getting an interview if those two are the bottom tier ways of getting an interview? And this is what we define as tier 1 hiring manager recommendations and tier 2 hiring team member recommendations. The whole idea of getting a job without applying is for you to go directly to the hiring manager, talk to the hiring manager, pitch your skills to the hiring manager, say, hey, listen, you have a role open. This is why I'm a great fit. Would love to chat a little bit more about your role before I even apply. Because the hope is that if you can get to the hiring manager, pitch yourself, and the hiring manager likes you, the hiring manager is going to say, hey, listen, Nora, I actually really think you're a solid candidate. And they're going to put your resume, send your resume to the recruiter. And the recruiter is going to then interview you because you've already passed the hiring manager's bar. And that's what we mean by getting a job without applying online. Getting in touch with the hiring manager or the hiring teams, getting their recommendations, pushing them to the recruiter. And that's how you skirt that initial resume screen, recruiter call, and you jump straight to the hiring manager call.
And, we have a lot of people in the comments who are saying that they've heard of the applicant tracking system and things like that. And I always want to encourage people that if you are applying online, though, make sure you read the instructions, because a lot of times when you get auto rejected, it's because you may have clicked a button wrong, you didn't meet the minimum requirements or something like that. So make sure you read the instructions if you are applying online. Absolutely. But if you do want to go that route where you say, okay, maybe I'm not going to apply, you still need to get in touch with people within the company. So either the hiring manager or the recruiter. And how do you find that? Because it's not always front and center in a job posting.
That's exactly right. And at Consulting, we've thought about 15 ways to find it. But let me tell you one of the most easy one that I think almost everyone misses. So type in the chat if you've ever seen a LinkedIn post that starts with, I'm humbled and happy to announce. Type me in the chat if you've heard of those posts before or if you've seen them before. I'm definitely guilty of creating those kinds of posts. But I have to imagine almost every single person here has heard of one of those posts. And I'm seeing the chat here, and I definitely see me's a ton in the chat. So in almost every single one of those posts, it's easy for every single one of us to read it and go, humble brag, scroll past away, right? You don't take a second look at it. But if you read one of those posts, what you're going to actually find are one of two things. In the post, you're going to find, I'd like to thank person 1, person 2, person 3, person 4, person 5, person 6. And who do you think those people are? They're going to be one of two people. They're going to be tier 1, the hiring manager, in those comments to say, thank you so much, Joe Smith, for the opportunity. I'm so excited to join your team. Or you're going to also see, thank you so much to recruiter 1, recruiter 2, recruiter 3, recruiter 4, recruiter 5 for all that you've done. And those people are either going to be in the tier 1 or tier 2. You send a personalized invite to every single one of them. Once you do, that's how you get connected to the hiring team member or the hiring team or the hiring manager. And if you go on onesulting.com/resources, we have all these networking templates for you all that you can use for free. And I want you to try it. Try it for a week straight. Every time you see it, send personalized invites to every single people on the LinkedIn post, and you're immediately going to see your job search change.
And I guess, one question I have is that people may run into roadblocks doing that, though, right? Because you can't control necessarily the person on the other side of that message. So a hiring manager, they may not want to talk to you. It's great if you're already connected to them. But if they have an open job and or you're looking for work, they may say, you should talk to the recruiter and not me.
That's right. Yeah, that's a really great question, and one of the most common things that we hear. Now, if a hiring manager says that, is either one of two things. It means that the initial impression that the hiring manager had gotten of you actually isn't as highly as it doesn't pass their initial bar. What that should tell you, if you've done with this a number of hiring managers and the hiring manager goes, hey, talk to the recruiter, just apply online, then that calls for you to update your LinkedIn profile. And that means that you need to pack a quicker punch. You need to pack a stronger punch by doing the following. What you should do is, if you get a lot of those messages, look at 5 or 6 of the job descriptions that have the same job title. So for example, type in the chat, everybody, what fields you want to get into, whether that's law, product management, marketing, engineering. Type in the chat below what field you want to get into. Let's use product management as an example. So what I would do, just to make sure my LinkedIn is solid, is I would go through 5 or 6 job postings of a product manager role that I would apply for, look at the roles and responsibilities, copy and paste every single one of those bullet points onto a Word doc, and see, do I have bullet points or words on my LinkedIn that cross-references those bullet points for a product manager? The answer must be a resounding yes. It must be absolutely, Jerry, I do. And if the answer is, I'm not sure, if you're not sure, think about what the hiring manager is thinking. They're probably spending anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds on your LinkedIn profile. They should be interested. Their interest should be piqued, because that's all within your control. So that's really what I recommend, of making sure when you reach out to the right hiring managers and you get the responses, hey, apply online, talk to the recruiter, that's really going to be the name of the game there. But the second piece of it, what we've learned just interviewing hundreds of hiring managers, is that one of the most common misconceptions, or the biggest pet peeve of a hiring manager and recruiter, is reaching out to them about a role that isn't part of their team. So for example, when I was at Lucid, I was managing a team of strategy analysts. If someone reached out to me and said, hey, I'm interested in a role on marketing at Lucid, can you help me? Or when I was at Google, I was in strategy and operations. And if someone reached out to me and said, hey, I want to learn more about software engineering at Google, I can't really help because that's not within my field. So it's really making sure the hiring manager that you find and that you reach out to is actually the hiring manager who's hiring for a role that you can actually get and you're qualified for.
Yeah, definitely. And, what about, and actually we do have quite a few people talking about the industries they want to get into, from law, supply chain, learning and development. So we got a lot of people looking at a lot of different fields. And in fact, I want to say hi to a few more people: Arlene from Florida, Florencia from Argentina, Mon from Kentucky, Anita from Texas, Michelle from Barcelona, Manawara from Toronto, Christine from New York City, and Shauna from Oregon. So welcome to all of you. And also get your questions in about job searching, about career development. We're going to be taking them in just a little bit. And I guess my last question for you, Jerry, on this topic would be, does this work for all jobs? Because it's great to reach out and say, hey, I would love a position with your company on your team. But are there jobs where maybe you should get an application in first, or just submit the application so it's on file? That way, when you get in touch with the hiring manager or the recruiter, you can say, I did apply, so they can call it up in their applicant tracking system.
Yeah, Andrew, I love that you brought this up. When we say land a job without applying online, that doesn't mean that you never apply to jobs. And I think we worked with a couple folks at Consulting, and they were like, "Yep, I've submitted 0 applications," and luckily they still have gotten interviews. But we just recommend that your application is not the only thing that you do. It doesn't mean that you should never get referrals. You absolutely should, but that's not the only thing that you should do. Across the 4 tiers of applying, we highly recommend that you split it evenly. 50% making sure you reach out to the hiring managers and hiring team members, and 50% applying and trying to get referrals. Really, you need to think about a good mix of what it's like for your role. And to Andrew's first question about, does this apply to every single job in the world? Now, some roles, like for example, professional services firms, they don't actually have hiring managers. They do a pooled recruiting system where a recruiter will find all the incoming analysts, they'll find all the incoming associates, and your manager changes by project. So in those cases, that's where you're sort of deviates from the exception. But to Andrew's point, yes, you should always apply, but just make sure you don't spend all your time applying, because I know that's the easiest thing to default to, but it is one of the least effective ways to landing an interview, especially if you don't come from a Harvard or an MIT, because that really, you have to make sure you stand out somehow, and reaching out networking is the way to stand out.
Yeah, and I also, I always tell people to be holistic about your job search, which is sort of, it's not just applying, it's not just networking, it's sort of everything combined. And also, what's really great is that, recruiters, hiring managers, they're there to help you usually, especially recruiters. And also, what's important to know, because I've run into this before, is even if a recruiter or a person comes to you and say, hey, we have a great job for you at our company, you may still eventually need to submit an application online because of their
Absolutely.
internal processes, to the point where, like, they'll come to you and say, we have a great job for you. Are you interested? But before they could even get you into the building, you need to submit your application for their internal process. So you'll likely eventually have to submit something. So that's important to keep in mind. And we have a question here, when it comes to reaching out, like you said, finding LinkedIn posts from people at companies that you want to work with and connecting with people. Robert asks, should you send invitations to personnel at companies where you have no other connections? So basically, maybe their second, third degree connections. Should you still submit those connection requests?
Really, really great question. The answer there is absolutely you should. And the reason why is because I think the underlying implicit assumption that I've seen from people who come from non-traditional backgrounds is that they assume that they have no value to provide the hiring managers. I highly disagree. That if you fit all the job description, the qualifications of the job description, and that your resume has bullet points to address every single one of those bullet points, absolutely, you're doing the hiring manager a favor. You're doing the recruiter a favor, because what you've done is you've saved them a search on LinkedIn Recruiter. You've saved them an email that they don't have to send out, because you've now given yourself on a silver platter to say, hey, listen, I'm qualified for the role, and this is the reason why I am. I'd love to talk to you a little bit more to learn about the role and the company before I apply. Instead of saying, hey, listen, I have all the qualifications, please hire me, you want to sort of flip it on its head and say, hey, listen, I have all the roles and qualifications. I want to learn more before I apply, because that suddenly changes the power dynamics, right? It suddenly changes it from going from, hey, I have to sell myself to the recruiter and hiring managers, otherwise they won't like me, to now the hiring manager has to make sure that they have to give me good responses before I apply. And if they don't, I'm not going to apply. Remember, job seekers, you have the power of negotiation. You are the product and you are the goods and you have value. And when you embed that into your job search, that's really where you're going to see massive changes in your job search.
And speaking of the power of negotiation, related to salary, and we have a question from Karen, and she wants to know, how can you find out what the salary range is for a position so you know if it's worth applying for?
I love this question. Luckily, LinkedIn has a tool, linkedin.com/salary. And there are a number of other online tools that I recommend. But I highly, highly recommend that you do your research, like going on to linkedin.com/salary, going on other similar platforms to make sure you gather enough data for you to be able to say a fair market rate for the role that I am applying for is between $70,000 and $80,000. What can we do to meet in the middle, right? That's the kind of pitch that you want to have with that kind of research that you've done.
Got it. And we have a question from Deepika who asks, how can a recent graduate apply for an entry-level job without existing experience? So I think that's a lot of people, they face that. They sort of graduate, they may have experience from doing projects on campus, but how would you suggest they apply to jobs or get their foot in a door in a company when they don't have experience?
Really great question. So it all comes back to the job description. Your job description is going to be your guide of what type of experience you need. So first is really defining what bullet points am I trying to look for? The way to do that is very similar to what we talked about before or earlier, where you go through the job description, look at the roles and responsibilities, look at every single one of those bullet points and say, which of those roles and responsibilities does my resume have bullet points on? And which of those bullet points doesn't my resume have bullet points on? So that's really the first layer of question. Because then the second question that you should be thinking about is, cool, how can I get that experience? I really recommend 3 ways. One is making sure that you apply for an internship, apply to a company to make sure you actually get that experience. But let's say you don't have any experience and you're like, man, I don't really know what to do. That's where the 2 other buckets of experience comes in: volunteer experiences and project experiences. Volunteer experiences can look anywhere from going to a nonprofit and saying, hey, listen, I really want to get into marketing. I'd love to do some marketing work for you pro bono. And their incentive is, cool, we have someone to do our social media. Your incentive now is to go, cool, now I can work on some projects so I can list that under my experiences. The third is project experience, where let's say that you can't find volunteer experiences, then the other thing that you can do is go to local businesses that you really like and offer your help pro bono, or you can just start your own project. If you want to get into data science, for example, you can use free data sets like Kaggle, where you can get free data sets, create statistical models, and that all is experience. So really, I recommend those 3 main things. Making sure that you try to get an internship or a job. If that doesn't work, try to get volunteer experience. If that doesn't work, then start your own projects.
I think those are all really good pieces of advice. And actually, we have a question from Juan that's somewhat related. And Juan wants to know how you, transfer to a new field where you're trying to highlight transferable skills. So, basically, for people who maybe they don't have experience in a new field, but they have experience in another, how do they make that leap to a new field or industry?
Love that. So I really think about switching jobs in one of 3 buckets. You're either changing your function, aka you're going from being a financial analyst to being a software engineer. You're changing industries, where you're going from healthcare to tech, or you're doing both. So it's really making sure you define which of these 3 are you doing. Spoiler alert, doing both at the same time is extremely tough. Really recommend that you either change functions or you change industries first. So when you're changing functions, the biggest thing that you want to highlight is, for example, if you're changing functions and you're staying within the same industry. So if you're going to be a software financial analyst in tech and you're being a software engineer in tech, then the biggest transferable skills that you want to look at is, what are the roles and responsibilities that you have on being a financial analyst? And that's sort of like one circle of the Venn diagram. And what are the skills that's needed to be a software engineer? That's the other side of this Venn diagram. All those overlapping skills, those are the skills that you want to make sure you 100% highlight on your resume and your LinkedIn profile, because those are the things that people are going to really like. The second thing you really want to highlight is, because you're staying within the same industry, that you want to highlight your industry knowledge. For example, if you're coming from the financial analyst world, then chances are you're going to work a lot with numbers like revenue, cost type of data. If that's the case, then it might be the easiest transition for you to become a data engineer for the financial analyst teams, because you're going to still be using the same type of lingo. What does CPM look like? What does CPA look like? What does our ROI look like? And data engineers are going to have to pull that certain level of job, those type of data. So you really, really want to make sure that that's really consistent with the way that you approach a job search. Focus on the similarities, think about the Venn diagrams, and make sure you focus on the middle. If your middle is not big enough, that's where we go back to the previous question of how to get experience. Work on a project, or find another job, or get volunteer experience.
Got it. And, and also just for anyone watching, if you want to watch the show again, because I know we're going through a lot of topics, an archived version of the video will be available immediately after in the same post that you're watching this now. So you just have to click refresh and it'll be there. And also, Jerry, when it comes to interviews, so once you get your foot in the door and you say, great, I'm going to wow them during an interview, some people get nervous, and Yasir says that applies to them. So, do you have any interview tips for people?
Yes. So the biggest thing I've noticed when I was an interviewer at Google is that as soon as I got into the call or got into the interview, people would say, hey, Jerry, very nice to meet you. Very excited to interview you here. And then I'd be like, cool, tell me about yourself. Then they go, okay, so my name is Jerry and I'm very excited to be here today, right? So like immediately you see that emotion shift, right? It goes from being very excited to being professional. Then it goes, I must be serious. I must do this. And what I found to be most helpful in an interview is to make sure that you keep it as a conversation. And these are two ways that I recommend that you keep it a conversation. One is when everybody type in the chat, what is the first question that most people will ask you in an interview? Type in the chat. What do you think is the number one question, the first question that people will ask? The first question most people ask is, how are you? Sounds really simple and it sounds really basic, but the biggest thing that I want you to do next when you're asked, how are you, in a networking call, in a coffee chat, or even in an interview, is really to say, hey, I'm actually doing really well today. I went out for a jog this morning. I had a really great breakfast. I had an acai bowl. How are you doing today? The more that you can share about yourself, the more that you'll realize that the first 5 minutes of your interview, you're going to be talking about your morning or your breakfast or anything that you bring up. And it's not to show what your favorite breakfast is, but it's to really build that connection with that person, because you basically are making not only yourself feel comfortable, but you're making the other person on the end feel like it's a conversation. The more that you can do that, the more that the person is going to go, check, this person absolutely is a culture fit. And I argue that having this right soft skills is actually more important than having the right hard skills, because you can all.
Hi, everyone. I think we lost Jerry briefly. Hopefully we can get him back. But, I don't know if that was an editing issue. But Jerry obviously is giving a ton of... Oh, there he is. Welcome back.
I accidentally clicked my mouse.
It happens. It happens to the best of us.
I appreciate it.
So why don't we move on to another question?
Sure.
And this one I think is important because so many people encounter this, which is ageism. And we have a question here from Henry, which basically says, ageism is a real thing, and I'm feeling a bit overlooked in the current job market. Any advice for standing out?
Yeah, listen, it's real. It goes for both who are on the younger side and folks who are both on the older side. I remember when I was on a call with a recruiter once, this recruiter asked me, hey, how old are you? And I said, listen, I don't feel comfortable sharing that number. I'd rather focus on the impact that I can bring. Then she said, cool, well, tell me your graduation year. And I said, you're basically asking me the same thing. And we went back and forth for a little bit. After 5 minutes, I said, you know what? Thank you so much for your time. If age is what you're looking for, I'm not your guy. And she said, well, I need to know it. And so first, that ageism is real. I hear you. I see you. Absolutely should not be a factor to be considered. That being said, one of the ways that I found to be helpful is on your resume, removing your graduation year immediately helps fight against that when you're both older and younger. Because then what happens is that people aren't going to be thinking about, all right, well, you graduated back in 1980 or you graduated in 2020. They're going to focus more so on your experience. And especially for those people who have more years of experience, the biggest and most important thing is that you want to be focusing on the experiences that are relevant to the role that you have. You don't want to list out every single job that you've had. So whether or not that means the past, you want to focus on your experiences for the past 7 or 10 years, that is perfectly fine, because it doesn't mean, because chances are not every single job will be relevant to the type of roles that you're applying for today. Similar to the people who are younger in their career and are afraid of facing ageism, I 100% recommend deleting your class year off of your resume. And if you feel comfortable off of your LinkedIn, personally for me, I don't have either. And that has enabled me to interview for roles that require 5 to 8 years of experience when I had 2. So I really recommend that, really as much as you possibly can, removing that age side of things just removes a variable that could potentially go against you in your job search.
And also, I think one of the things that I always talk to people about, and this comes in a lot of shapes and forms of different isms that people face when they're looking for work, is to, work on your confidence too. Because I think a lot of people, they go into conversations and they feel defeated before they even get a rejection or even a positive review. So if you do feel self-conscious about your age or something else, don't focus so much on that. Go in there knowing that you're a good candidate, that you deserve that job. And when you do that, the good news is that basically, if you just set the tone for the interview or the conversation, that won't weigh down that interview or that conversation. So that's always my advice for people facing ageism. And Jerry, before we go, I was hoping you could sort of share sort of your best piece of advice for job seekers out there, because everyone's probably going to sign off and go about their day. But if there's one thing that they could do today, what would you suggest that is?
If there's one message that I wish I could instill in every single job seeker's mind today, is don't self-reject. Almost everyone that I talk to, who, especially those who come from non-traditional backgrounds, have these sort of thoughts, these type of thoughts when they go about the job search. Hey, I'm not good enough. But why would this person want to talk to me? But I just don't understand why I should even try when I know that there's people better than me. I need to get more experience because I know people at Google have a lot more. Those type of thoughts where you're pretty much manifesting your own rejection because you're the one who's rejecting yourself, right? As much as rejections hurt from companies, I find that to be better and more informative than you rejecting yourself. Because what I found is that when people don't even try to apply for the Facebooks or the Googles or the LinkedIns, and they don't always have to be your dream company, but if they are, apply. If you have another company like Procter and Gamble that you really like and you're like, I'm gonna wait 3 years before I apply today, apply this weekend. Because the biggest thing that you can do for your career is to take a chance on yourself. And how you do that is to remove that little talk in your brain that says, hey, I don't think you're ready yet. I don't think you're good enough. Try it. Because the best thing that can happen is that you suddenly find yourself in a role that you would have thought you were going to be in 3 years from now, but you got it today. Or on the opposite end, you might find that you just got rejected. And even if you do get rejected, that's data for you to now use in your job search. So don't self-reject. Whenever you have those thoughts, really just tune those out. Mindlessly apply, well, not mindlessly apply, but really make sure that you tune those noises out. Apply to jobs that you know that you're qualified for, because chances are you are qualified for those jobs.
Yes, and I think that's great advice. And you can't win the game unless you play it. So
Exactly
get in the
right.
game. Well, thanks so much, Jerry. I hope people were following along at the bottom of the screen to follow you on LinkedIn. And yeah, it was a great conversation.
Andrew, thank you so much for inviting me here today. I had such a blast. And everyone in the audience, I hope you took away even a small bit of encouragement or knowledge about the job search process. Really, the job search process is a function of time and effort. The more time that you can put in, the more effort that you put in, the more successful you will be. Thank you so much for tuning in, everybody.
Great. Thanks so much, Jerry. And then thank you all for tuning in. I'm sure you did take a lot away from this conversation. And we will be off next Friday. But don't worry, we'll be back the following Friday. And we always have great programming here on the LinkedIn news page. And in fact, on Monday, October 25th, my colleague Nina Melendez will be speaking with General Stanley McChrystal about how we understand uncertainty and tactical risk. He'll obviously know a lot about that. Again, that's Monday, October 25th at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And you could find the RSVP link probably in the comments or on the LinkedIn news page. And then obviously, like I said, if you want to rewatch today's show, just click refresh once the show's done, and an archived version will be here waiting for you forever, as long as you want to keep watching it. So until next time, please take care of yourself. The pandemic is still going on, and you can only be a good candidate. You could only get hired if you're safe and well enough to do so. So make sure you take care of yourself. And until next time, best of luck.